I've been reviewing Apple products for more than a decade, and I've never seen more people curious about a new Apple product than what I've experienced over the past 90 days with the Apple Watch Ultra. It's an eye catcher, the only Apple Watch I'd ever consider to be flashy, thanks to the orange strap, the orange accents, and that massive 49mm face. But still, there are a few issues I have with this watch, especially given the way that Apple was marketing it, and also that $800 price tag. So I decided to go with the Alpine Loop, but you could also choose from the Trail Loop and the Ocean Band, and I did try all of them on. The orange Alpine Loop was my favorite simply for the unique factor and that flashy pop of orange. However, if you want the most comfortable band, I would say that is the Trail Loop. That was the best in terms of comfort. But after using this Alpine Loop for the past couple of months, I have noticed that there is a tad bit of dirt buildup on it, but nothing terrible. I would probably stay away from the Starlight version though for this specific reason. But I've also just had this watch submerged underwater. I wear it in the shower and it handles just fine. I mean, it does feel wet, a little bit damp right once you get out, but it's perfectly fine after a couple of minutes. And we'll discuss another quirk of using this band and also my issues with battery life in a minute. But first, let's talk about the build quality, because I don't think I've ever felt more confident wearing an Apple Watch than I have with the Ultra. So not only does this feel like a cool watch, which I actually wore with the suit, by the way, so it was kind of turned into a cool watch, but I've also never been afraid to bang this watch against hard surfaces like I usually am with my watches. I'm usually pretty afraid to hit something, as you know, I'm worried that it's going to scratch it up or maybe break the glass. But you know, I've hit this up against car trim while buckling my seatbelt several times. I've smacked it against walls and rails while traveling, and there's nothing to show for it. And that's because it's made of aerospace grade titanium, so it's pretty hard to break. And that new case design is also great for durability, as it's more raised on the sides to protect that flat sapphire crystal screen from edge impacts. The digital crown is also significantly larger and has ridges for better grip and more precise scrolling, although sometimes when it's close or right on top of my wrist bone right here, it does prevent it from moving. Like I'm not able to scroll. I can just kind of feel the scroll wheel pushing against my wrist bone right here, which has been kind of annoying. The side button, however, is raised from the case and has solved all of my issues with false triggering Siri. So that drove me crazy on previous Apple Watches. I would always, when I would like kind of move my wrist in certain ways, I would accidentally press on the side button, press and hold on the side button, and it would activate Siri. But that has not happened one time with the Apple Watch Ultra, which is great. Now this watch weighs in at 61 grams, and on paper, it does seem like it would be heavy on the wrist, given that the 45mm Series 8 weighs just 39 grams. But like I mentioned earlier, that is just simply not the case. And this was perhaps my biggest surprise with the Ultra in general. I mean, not to mention, I have small wrists, so I was really worried about just looking too big on my wrist, but I've not experienced that one time. I've never thought it was too big, and it's also just felt so much more lightweight than I could have ever expected. Now, one of the biggest perks with this watch is that it comes standard with cellular connectivity. Now, it is still $10 a month and adds on to your phone line, but it is well worth it if you use this watch enough. I love being able to make phone calls, send text messages, listen to my Apple Music playlists, and really just do anything I want without needing my iPhone nearby. So I think that if you're ever going to pay for cellular on a watch, it should be on the Ultra. The new precision dual frequency GPS that's built into this watch is also a significant upgrade over any previous Apple Watch. So it's much more accurate with walking directions, with detecting your running speed and pace, and it's just simply more reliable in areas that have spotty connection. Now, it's also the reason that Apple was able to introduce the new backtrack feature, which allows you to retrace your steps and kind of mark objects in case you get lost. Now, the action button on the left side of the watch is definitely not something that you or anybody around you is going to miss, since it does have that orange accent on it. It's very distinctive, especially with the speakers right above it. You kind of just get a lot of attention on this side of the watch. The whole thing gets a ton of attention, but especially this left side is pretty intriguing for most people. But honestly, you know, I've only used the action button a handful of times. It is nice because it can allow you to quickly start a workout, run a shortcut, or start a stopwatch, but I just have not found myself using it very often. You can also press and hold on the action button to trigger the extremely loud alarm, which thankfully you can disable that, because if you accidentally hit this and hold on this button, it's going to scare the crap out of you because it is pretty loud. But yeah, like I said, I haven't really used this feature very often. However, I can see this getting added functionality via software updates in the future. Now, the display is also an absolute joy to use. It's huge. I mean, that's one of the main reasons you probably got the Apple Watch Ultra is because of that massive 49mm face. So it does make typing and navigating throughout all of watchOS a breeze, and the 2000 nits of peak brightness makes a massive difference in direct sunlight. I never necessarily struggled to see my Apple Watch in the sunlight, but I didn't know that it was so bad until I got the Ultra, because it makes a pretty big difference. And again, that is double the peak brightness of any other Apple Watch, and it's definitely noticeable. Now, as for the health sensors on the back, we do have pretty much the same setup as the Apple Watch Series 8, just with added depth gauge and water temperature sensors for diving. But to be honest, the only health related things I use this watch for are workouts and sleep. I haven't really done any hiking yet, and I don't dive or do any extreme sports, so the amount of sensors on here are really overkill for me and probably will be for most people. But let's touch more on that sleep tracking, because this is the first Apple Watch I've actually been able to track my sleep with. And that's because we finally have more than 1 day of battery life. So Apple rates the Ultra for up to 36 hours of battery life, and that's actually a low ball from Apple. So most of the time I get a little bit more than 36 hours. I'd say closer to 40 hours from what I've actually calculated, but it mainly depends on the amount of notifications you get, how often you use the cellular connection, how often you do workouts. But that 36 hours is double the battery life of the Series 8, which is a huge difference. And again, I think most people will get more than 36 hours. Now, they do also rate it for an amazing 60 hours when on low power settings, which seems in line with my testing, although I haven't really used this feature too often. But my big problem with battery life is that it still sucks in comparison to the Apple Watch Ultra's real competitors. So if you're going on a long, off the grid expedition, 2.5 days is not close to enough battery life. Same with diving trips. I've seen several Reddit posts from divers who love the Apple Watch Ultra, but just simply have to dismiss it due to the bad battery life in comparison to the 20 days that the competing watches get, like Garmin and the G Squad Pro. There's several others out there that have much better battery life than the Ultra. Now, I understand that this is an Apple product at the end of the day, and it does a lot more than those watches, and most people will not be going off the grid for weeks at a time with this watch, but Apple did market this at that demographic, the divers, the explorers. They have somebody on the side of Mount Everest, acting like they're going to have signal up there and going to be able to use the Apple Watch for a long period of time. But, it's sufficient for a day or two, but that's it. Maybe we'll see a hardcore version next that gets rid of all the extras in exchange for a 20-day battery life, but I'm not holding my breath for that. But if you're watching this right now, you probably are not going to be one of those people who's going to go off the grid for multiple days at a time, so it's not going to apply to you. So let me just say, battery life is incredible on the Apple Watch if you're not one of those people. All right, so now that I have that out of the way, let's go back to sleep tracking, because I do use the built-in sleep app, which works fine. I know there are better third-party apps out there, but this one works fine, and I love having my sleep data integrated directly into the health app on my iPhone. And like I mentioned before, despite the large size, it actually does not bother me at all in bed. It's lightweight, it never needs to be squeezing my wrist. It doesn't need to be too tight. So the Apple Watch Ultra feels just fine on my wrist while I sleep. Now, the sleep tracking gets enabled automatically based on your sleep schedule that you set up in the clock application. And when the alarm goes off, it gives you a sound and a nice vibration, a very subtle vibration on the wrist. And thankfully, it's not overpowering where it's going to make you jump up out of your sleep, but it's really great if you sleep with somebody else in the room, or if you have kids or something like that. It's a very discreet way of waking you up without waking others up in that same room. I also like using the exclusive red mode on the Wayfinder watch face at night before bed, since it is much easier on my eyes. All you have to do is go onto this watch face and scroll up right there onto the digital crown, and it will show you that red appearance. And I usually wake up with more than enough battery to continue my day without needing to charge the watch right when I wake up. I usually get a shower with the watch on, and I continue to go out throughout that next day. Depending on if it's the second or third day, I may or may not need to charge it later on that day. But, when it does come time to charge, it's always on the charger for less than an hour before it's back to 100%. Since I never usually let it get down under 10%, it usually takes me right around an hour, I would say, to get back to 100%, which is pretty quick. So all in all, I love the Apple Watch Ultra a lot. As a matter of fact, it's my favorite Apple product of 2022, and it's not even really that close. I've never wanted to wear an Apple Watch as much much as I do with the Ultra. I think it's overkill for most people, but that's the point. It's unnecessarily necessary if you're in the market for a new Apple Watch and don't mind spending a little bit of extra money for the best Apple Watch we've ever seen, and definitely the most flashy Apple Watch we've ever seen. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for a more long-term review of the Apple Watch Ultra.